Imagine a nation born out of rebellion, where farmers and merchants dare to defy the greatest empire of their time. Imagine that same nation torn apart by civil war, only to rise again with music that shook the world, films that captured dreams, and voices that demanded freedom. From the gunfire of revolution to the rhythms of jazz, from the silence of space to the roar of rock and roll, America's story is not just about politics or power. It is about moments that change how people everywhere think, feel, and live. This is a journey of a country that began with an idea, survived its darkest trials, and transformed itself into a cultural force that still shapes our world today. Stay with me, because what you are about to hear is not simply history. It is the living heartbeat of a nation, from revolution to pop culture, from struggle to inspiration. Imagine standing on a crowded street. The air is filled with voices, the sound of footsteps, and the endless rhythm of daily life. People move in every direction, each with a story you may never hear. In moments like these, it is easy to forget that history is built not only by great events, but also by ordinary lives. Yet, somewhere in the noise of daily existence, revolutions are born. In the late 18th century, 13 colonies on the eastern coast of North America found themselves at a crossroads. They were ruled by one of the most powerful empires in the world, Great Britain, but dissatisfaction was growing. Taxes were high, freedoms were limited, and the people began to feel that their voices were ignored. Whispers of rebellion turned into fiery debates in taverns, town halls, and marketplaces. Ordinary men and women began to dream of something unthinkable: independence. This was not merely a political disagreement. It was a daring act of imagination. To challenge the authority of a king was to step into dangerous territory. But the desire for freedom burned too brightly to be silenced. Farmers, merchants, and scholars began to speak of liberty as if it were a right written into the very fabric of existence. They declared that all men were created equal, and with that declaration, they lit a flame that could never again be extinguished. The American Revolution was more than a military conflict. It was a battle of ideas, fought in the minds of people as much as on the fields of war. It asked the question, could ordinary citizens govern themselves without a monarch to rule over them? The world watched in disbelief as colonists, with limited resources and little experience, faced a mighty British army. It seemed impossible. Yet, hope has a way of turning impossibility into reality. As the war raged on, stories of courage spread from town to town. A farmer left his plow to pick up a musket. A blacksmith closed his shop to march with his neighbors. Women, often forgotten in the grand narratives of war, organized supplies, sewed uniforms, and even carried messages through enemy lines. The revolution was not only about generals and politicians, but also about countless individuals whose names history may never remember, yet whose sacrifices shaped the destiny of a nation. When victory finally came, it was not just a triumph over Britain, but also a triumph of vision. A new nation was born, fragile and uncertain, but determined to define its own future. It was an experiment unlike anything the world had ever seen. The United States of America stepped onto the global stage, not with centuries of tradition, but with an idea that freedom and self-government were possible. But even in that moment of triumph, questions remained. Could this fragile union survive? Could ideals hold against the weight of reality? Could liberty be extended to all, or would it remain a privilege for a few? These unanswered questions lingered, waiting to resurface in the chapters of history yet to come. As you watch people move through the streets around you, carrying groceries, selling food, or simply talking with friends, remember that the revolution was not only about soldiers and leaders. It was about people just like these, ordinary lives caught in extraordinary times. And from their struggles, a new story began to unfold. History rarely moves in a straight line. After the birth of the United States, the promise of liberty and equality faced its greatest test. The ideals declared in the Revolution were powerful, yet not fully realized. For many people, freedom remained a dream rather than reality. The nation grew, but it grew unevenly, carrying within it deep divisions that would eventually erupt into the bloodiest conflict on American soil. The early 19th century was a period of expansion. New territories were claimed, cities flourished, and industry began to reshape the land. But beneath this progress lay a shadow, the question of slavery. In the southern states, the economy depended on enslaved labor. In the North, many voices demanded abolition. These opposing forces pulled the young nation in different directions, stretching it to the breaking point. Imagine standing on a busy street in those years. Merchants call out their prices, children chase each other through alleyways, and wagons rattle over cobblestones. Life feels ordinary, even simple. Yet behind these everyday scenes, debates rage in Congress, in churches, and in homes. Could a nation built on liberty continue to tolerate bondage? Could states with such different visions remain united under one flag? When words could no longer bridge the divide, war became inevitable. The Civil War was not only a clash of armies, but confrontation between two visions of America. Brothers fought against brothers. Neighbors turned into enemies. The land itself became a battlefield, scarred by fire and blood. It was a time when the very survival of the United States hung in the balance. Leaders like Abraham Lincoln spoke of a nation that must remain whole, declaring that a house divided against itself could not stand. Soldiers, many barely older than teenagers, marched into battles that would decide the fate of millions. Fields once used for farming became graves. Towns once filled with laughter fell silent with mourning. But even in the darkness of war, moments of resilience shone through. Enslaved men and women seized a chance to fight for their freedom, joining the Union cause. Families endured hardship, sending their loved ones to fight, while keeping their homes alive. And when the war ended, with the Union preserved and slavery abolished, America stood changed forever. Yet victory did not erase the wounds. The end of the Civil War was the beginning of a long struggle for civil rights, a struggle that would echo through generations. The promise of equality, spoken in the Declaration of Independence, remained unfinished business. As you look at the movement of people around you, drivers navigating traffic, vendors arranging their goods, students rushing with books in hand, remember that history's greatest conflicts are not only about battles. They are about choices made by individuals, about courage in the face of division, and about the painful journey toward a more just society. The Civil War revealed the fragility of unity, but it also revealed something deeper: the determination of a people to keep moving forward. The United States had survived its greatest test, but the story was far from over. Ahead lay new challenges, new dreams, and new transformations that would once again redefine the nation. After the smoke of war cleared and the Union was preserved, America entered a new era. The 19th century gave way to the 20th, and with it came a sense of momentum that would carry the nation into places no one could have imagined. Factories roared with machines, cities stretched toward the sky, and millions of immigrants arrived on crowded ships, bringing with them dreams of opportunity. America was no longer just a country. It was becoming a symbol of possibility. Yet, what truly began to set America apart was not only its growing power, but also its culture. From the heart of New Orleans, a new sound emerged. It was raw, unpredictable, and alive. It was jazz. This music, born from African-American creativity, carried the weight of history while opening doors to future. Its rhythms traveled from smoky clubs to concert halls, and soon the world was listening. Jazz was more than entertainment. It was freedom expressed through sound. At the same time, another revolution was unfolding on the other side of the country. In California, the first flickering films appeared on screens, silent and simple at first. But quickly, the magic of cinema grew into something extraordinary. Hollywood transformed storytelling into a spectacle of light and shadow, capturing not only American lives, but also the universal emotions of love, fear, hope, and ambition. For the first time in history, stories could reach millions at once, shaping how people everywhere imagined the world. Meanwhile, life on the streets of America was changing. The automobile gave people freedom of movement. Diners offered cheap meals that tasted like home, and skyscrapers redefined city skylines. Even the smallest details of daily life, clothes, slang, styles, began to create trends that crossed oceans. The American way of life was becoming both admired and imitated, but not everything glittered. Industrial growth brought with it deep inequalities. Workers toiled long hours for little pay. Children labored in factories. In crowded tenements, families struggled to survive. The shine of progress was accompanied by shadows of hardship. Yet even in these struggles, movements for labor rights and women's suffrage began to gain strength, demanding that the promises of liberty reach further than before. As you picture the scenes around you, motorcycles weaving through traffic, food stalls filling the air with the smell of spices, and people negotiating prices with laughter and frustration, remember that American life in the early 20th century carried a similar rhythm. Ordinary people sought to survive, to build, to find joy where they could, and through their efforts, a cultural identity emerged that would shape the modern world. The rise of jazz, the magic of cinema, and the energy of a growing nation gave America a new kind of influence. It was no longer just about politics or war. It was about ideas, about stories, about art. America was learning that power was not only measured in armies or factories, but also in the ability to inspire. This was only the beginning. Ahead lay depression and war, triumphs and tragedies that would push America to its limits. Yet through it all, the rhythms of culture and the spark of innovation would remain at the heart of the American story. Every nation faces moments when its strength is tested, when the dreams of its people collide with the weight of reality. For America, the 20th century brought trials that shook its very foundation, yet also revealed its resilience in ways the world would never forget. The first great blow came with the Great Depression. The stock market crash of 1929 sent shockwaves across the nation. Banks collapsed, factories closed, and millions of Americans found themselves without work. Bread lines stretched around city blocks, and families who once lived in comfort suddenly faced hunger. The glittering promise of prosperity seemed to vanish overnight. Yet in the midst of despair, the human spirit endured. Communities shared what little they had. Musicians, writers, and filmmakers captured the struggles and hopes of the people, reminding them that they were not alone. Leaders spoke of a New Deal, offering not only programmed recovery, but also a renewed sense of purpose. Slowly, painfully, the nation began to rise again. But recovery was soon overshadowed by the thunder of war. When the Second World War erupted, America once again faced a choice: to retreat into isolation or to step onto the global stage. The attack on Pearl Harbor left no room for hesitation. Factories shifted from producing cars to building tanks and planes. Young men and women filled the ranks of the armed forces. Families planted victory gardens and rationed food. Every street, every household felt the weight of war. The cost was enormous, but so were the stakes. The fight was not only against foreign enemies, but also for the survival of freedom itself. And when the war finally ended, America emerged not broken, but stronger. Soldiers returned home to new opportunities. The economy boomed. The image of America as a global leader was cemented. Yet, even as victory parades filled the streets, another struggle began to rise from within. The civil rights movement emerged as a force that could no longer be ignored. For too long, African Americans have been denied the very freedoms a nation claimed to defend. From bus boycotts to marches on Washington, voices demanded change. Leaders like Martin Luther King Jr. called for justice with words that still echo through history. "I have a dream." The streets became arenas of protest, courage, and sometimes violence. Students sat at lunch counters, refusing to leave until they were served. Marchers faced water hoses and dogs, yet did not back down. The nation that fought for liberty abroad was now forced to confront its failure to deliver liberty at home. Through struggle and sacrifice, progress was made. Segregation was challenged, voting rights were expanded, and the idea of equality took on new life. Yet, the fight was far from over. Every gain came with resistance. Every step forward revealed how much further there was to go. As you watch the daily rhythm of life around you, vendors bargaining with customers, children running along sidewalks, and workers rushing through crowded streets, remember that the great trials of the 20th century were not abstract events. They were lived in the homes, the workplaces, and the hearts of ordinary people. A father searching for work during the Depression, a mother waiting for her son to return from war, a student daring to demand equality. All of them carried the story forward. By the mid-20th century, America had become a nation of contradictions. It was both a land of immense opportunity and a land struggling with injustice. It was a leader on the world stage, yet divided at home. And through these tensions, the story continued to unfold, preparing the way for a new era defined not only by politics and war, but also by culture, imagination, and the power of dreams. By the second half of the 20th century, America was no longer only a nation. It had become an idea, a symbol that carried both admiration and criticism, but one that could not be ignored. What set this period apart was not just political power or military strength, but something less tangible and yet more influential: culture. Music became a force that crossed borders and generations. The arrival of rock and roll in the 1950s sent shockwaves through the youth of the world. With its raw energy and rebellious spirit, it gave voice to a generation eager to break free from tradition. Elvis Presley shook concert halls with style that seemed dangerous and liberating at the same time. Soon, American music, from blues and country to hip-hop and pop, will become the heartbeat of global culture. Television brought shared experiences into every living room. Families gathered around small glowing screens to watch the same shows, hear the same news, and laugh at the same comedians. The medium created a sense of unity, while also shaping the values and aspirations of millions. For the first time, the image of the American dream was broadcast daily, reaching not only citizens, but also audiences around the world. And then in 1969, the unimaginable happened. A rocket launched from Earth carried astronauts to the moon. When Neil Armstrong set foot on the lunar surface and declared, "That is one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," it was not just American victory. It was a moment when humanity itself seemed to expand its boundaries. The world watched in awe, and America stood at the center of history. Yet pop culture was not limited to music, television, or even space exploration. It lived in the rise of global icons. Actors whose faces lit up movie posters in every language, athletes who became legends, and artists who turned canvases into statements of rebellion and hope. American brands filled shops. Its movies filled theaters, and its slang filled conversations. Through culture, America found a new kind of influence: soft power, the ability to inspire rather than command. But culture was not only about glamour. It was also about protest and resistance. Musicians wrote songs against war. Students demanded change, and artists pushed against the limits of society's expectations. The stage and the street became places where freedom was redefined, where new movements were born. As decades passed, America entered the digital age. The invention of the internet, once a tool for the military, became a platform that changed everyday life. Social media, smartphones, and global connectivity blurred the lines between nations. American companies stood at the center of this revolution, shaping how billions communicate, work, and dream. Today, when we look at the story of America, we do not see only battles, presidents, or laws. We see moments that captured the imagination of the world. From revolution to civil rights, from jazz to hip-hop, from Hollywood film to internet memes, the identity of America is written not only in its history books, but also in its culture. As you watch the everyday scenes around you, street vendors serving customers, friends laughing on the glow of city lights, motorcycles rushing past crowded markets, remember that the story of America is not just about one nation. It is about humanity's search for freedom, expression, and meaning. It is about the way ordinary lives in every corner of the world create extraordinary legacies. From revolution to pop culture, the moments that made America remind us of something timeless. History is alive. It is written not only in speeches and monuments, but in the rhythms of music, the images on a screen, and the small acts of courage that ripple outward, shaping generations. The story continues. And as it does, it invites us to ask what moments, born today in the streets and lives of ordinary people, will define the world of tomorrow.